are so delighted to have you back.
Thank you so much.
This is your first back since we've been here, right?
That's right.
Yes. So we're gradually getting our core guys and ladies back a bit.
And it's so important to meet as a group in real life. You know, you often forget just how important it is to have spiritual friendship, and there's only so much you can do on the internet, and there's only so much value you get out of that as well. And for a group like this, you come together and meet, and you know the best part probably is the conversations outside, and knowing that there's a group of people just like you who are into the spiritual path. And then the meditation is very supportive, and then the Dharma talk, which I guess is my job tonight, is to point towards some aspect of truth, some aspect of the path, so that we can remember what's important about the spiritual life in a world that doesn't really support our spiritual practice. And so the Buddha talked about the spiritual path as going against the stream, going in the opposite direction of society. And so as people who have an interest, a defined interest, an articulated interest in the spiritual path, then we at times find ourselves at odds with the world. And that's why the theme of tonight's talk, which I remembered after having sent it off a long time ago, is choosing contentment. So there's two words there. I thought maybe we'd start with a few definitions. So the one we probably need to define is contentment. What does it mean? This word contentment. And I'm looking for answers from you good people.
Comes to mind inner peace.
Inner peace. Okay.
Acceptance.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
Anything satisfied with what you feel or what you have, I'm not sure.
Being satisfied with what you have.
Not grasping.
Not grasping, yeah. Not reaching out. Anything else?
At home in yourself.
Being at home in yourself. That's quite a nice one. And maybe we can, sometimes like dictionary definitions are a bit tricky, but images are much easier to kind of like, have you got an image that comes to mind when you think about contentment?
Relaxed.
Someone who looks relaxed, yeah?
A warm fire, something about a crackling warm
A
fire.
warm fire, yes. Oh, you could be content. If only you had a warm fire.
If a warm fire happened to cross my path, I would likely feel content.
Yeah.
Very good. You see, I guess this helps us flesh out a little bit about what the meaning is. Like, it's very easy to be content if you have everything you want, isn't it? It's very easy not to reach out for something if you've already got it. Acceptance is an interesting one, because I guess that's why I used the title Choosing Contentment, because that's a little bit different. Acceptance is like kind of a bit like giving up. You know, it's like someone's locked you in the room and you're like, okay then, I'll just be content. And you'll be content with whatever you've got because you know that you have no choice. So that's a way of looking at the acceptance. And that's why I thought choosing contentment, because that kind of articulates that this is a decision that's been made, that you've actually decided that you want contentment. And this idea of being at home in yourself is quite nice, I think, because that means you don't need to look for anything else. You don't want to look for anything else. And there's been times in my life, and I hope there's been times in your life too, where you have felt completely at home in yourself, where you didn't want to reach out for anything, where you had that level of peace and acceptance and just were happy to be. But it's a very elusive experience. But if you've tasted it, then you know it's sweet and it's really, really delicious. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, this idea of contentment and where we can find it, where we can't find it, and also what the Buddha meant by contentment. And so, you know, I'm a Buddhist monk, so I often talk about Buddhist things and Buddhist texts. So it's not unexpected. and I mention that because there's a lot of teachers out there who are teaching meditation, Dhamma, and who are maybe even talking a little bit about Buddhism, but they may not emphasize this topic of contentment. And I think probably because contentment is related to another Buddhist concept, which is renunciation. And in the Buddhist texts, it's called nekkhamma. Nekkhamma means renunciation. Renunciation is one of the 3 right intentions. So if you're familiar at all with the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the spiritual path laid out by the Buddha, there's 8 different factors. And the second one, samma sankappo, is right intention, right motivation, sometimes it's translated as. And this has 3 aspects to it. First is nekkhamma sankappo, nekkhamma, renunciation, the right intention of renunciation. And the second 2 are non-ill will, that means love. And the third is non-cruelty, it means non-harm, non-compassion. Means compassion. And so these are the 3 right intentions that we need to have if we want to make progress on the spiritual path. This belongs to the wisdom aspect of the spiritual path, and right intention is something that's going to lead us in our life. If we have the right motivation, then we're going to be happy, yeah? If we have the right motivation, we'll get the right result. So if we have an opposite motivation, then we're going to have a result. I'm not saying wrong result, but we're going to have the opposite of right. But what does that mean? What does that look like? We'll discuss. And so just to finish up this introduction part of my talk, the image that the Buddha used to describe contentment is the image of a monk with his robes and his bowl. And the Buddha said that this monk should travel wherever he goes with just his 3 robes and his bowl, like the wings of a bird, in that the bird has only its wings as its burden. In the same way, the monk should be burdened only by 3 robes and a bowl. So this is an image that the Buddha used to talk about contentment. And that's why the Sangha, the monastic Sangha, the ordained Sangha, are supposed to be beacons of contentment. We're supposed to be beacons of renunciation. And so this is something that probably is important in terms of development on the spiritual path, and something that we as consumers of Dhamma, consumers of teachers of Dhamma, should be a little bit aware of, that it's important to have some renunciation if you want to be on the spiritual path. It's important to listen to people who have some experience of renunciation, because it's such an important part of the path. And so if people are charging a fortune for their talks, coming in stretch Rolls-Royce limousines and talking about the spiritual path, but not actually practicing it, then we should question. And when you look throughout history, you find that almost all spiritual traditions talk about contentment, about having modesty of means, making do with little, not needing a lot. And when we think about some of the perversions of the spiritual path, you think about spiritual traditions with gigantic buildings and gold everything and properties valued at billions of dollars and what have you, and you think something has gone wrong here. You know, it's kind of a perversion of what the spiritual path should be. And when you look at the original teachings and then compare it to what's happening, you kind of think, how did we get here? Because the original teachings of people like Jesus or the Buddha or many of the teachers we find in the Vedas and I guess what became the Hindu tradition, many traditions across the world, Indigenous Australians, really valued contentment and really valued simplicity of means. But for some reason, you know, Buddhism, we find a lot of wealth. Some of the forest monasteries in Thailand have billions of dollars in their bank accounts. The church, well known to be one of the biggest property developers in the world. And so it just goes to show how easy it is for us to be led by the opposite of contentment, which is desire. And so it's easy for a monk to talk about, you know, renunciation. That's kind of my life. You know, I mentioned before the robes and the bowl. So we have 3 robes, not 3 sets of robes. 3 robes. We have this one, which is our outer robe. We have another one that looks like this, about the same size, which is double layered. And we wear that when it's cold. We want to be warm. And we have a lower robe, which is just like a sarong. And these are our clothes. This is all we have. To be completely truthful, I have another lower robe, which I use as my work and sleeping robe. And we're allowed to have that. We're allowed to have a few other things like, you know, for warm weather, like a shirt or a jumper or something. And of course, you see here I've got some recording equipment, so I'm already going a long way. But we practice renunciation. I hand wash all my clothes. You might have seen I have patches here. So that's what happened. This is almost 5 years old now, this robe. And so it's wonderful. Get up in the morning, think, what will I wear? I know, something timeless. And then for the bowl, you know, it's an extraordinary thing in this country, Australia, with a minority Buddhist population, 2.3%, I think it is, that Bhante Sujato and I survive entirely on alms food. So we have a bowl. You may have seen images of monks with bowls from Thailand or Laos. And we walk down the street and people put food into our bowl. Beautiful, yeah? And this is the only way that we eat. We're not allowed to cook. We're not allowed to store food. Everything that we have is offered that day. We eat what we can and we share it with others, whether it's taking it to the local community centre, sharing it with birds, and we're not allowed to store it up. So whatever we've got, we use. After midday, no longer belongs to us. So we don't have a fridge. You look in the cupboard, there's nothing in the cupboard. Isn't that wonderful? I went to my mother's house the other day. I will give you the address later, because if the apocalypse comes, her larder is full to the brim. I kind of opened it up and I was actually shocked, because it was like a shop. And it was a little bit kind of, I was like, how can you need all this? But anyway, so that's what we have as monks, our 3 robes and our bowl. So our robes kind of cover us, and our bowl is our livelihood in a way. So we walk out in the street, and our job is to encourage kindness from others, to encourage people to be generous, to look after someone else apart from them. Because it's very easy to only care about yourself. So we're getting closer, I guess, to what it means to have the opposite of contentment. So we live very simply, and it's a real blessing. When you don't have any money, you know that we don't have any money, we don't handle money, I haven't touched money for many years, your life is so much simpler. You think it's going to be really difficult and really hard, yeah? You think money makes it easier. But actually, if you've got money, you've got worries. You're worried about getting it, you're worried about keeping it, you're worried about increasing it, and money causes a lot of stress, yeah? And then you walk into the shops, and what happens? You have to spend it, because you've got it. I walk into the shops, I don't have any money. I never even look in the windows. I don't want anything. I just can walk through that space without desire arising in the mind. But, you know, I'm not like a saint or anything. Even today, it's so interesting just how these things work. Even today, I was sitting on the train. It was a very long train ride. There's a lot of conversations going on. Women behind me were talking about their backpack. And one was saying, oh, it's such a nice backpack, such a lovely backpack, such a beautiful backpack. I really like your backpack. Where did you get it? And there's the whole story. And then they're talking about it, talking about features, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, I really want to look at the bag. I want to know what the bag is. And so I'm kind of like, and eventually I just did it. I was like, it was a boring backpack. But this is what is at the very base of our discontent. Sensual desire. And when I start talking about sensual desire, people start looking a little bit uncomfortable. Because they think I'm going to try to take it away from them. It's like when you give a dog a bone, you know, they're into it and then you try to grab it away. Because they're enjoying it, right? And we enjoy sensual things. For most of us, that's where we find our happiness. And for most of us, we haven't experienced a type of happiness that doesn't rely upon the pleasures of the senses. Most of us, this is the only way we've ever experienced happiness. And sensual desire seems like it can bring a whole heap of happiness for us. Promises a great deal, and we do enjoy it. There is gratification in sensory pleasures. If there wasn't, we wouldn't be so intoxicated by them, yeah? There is obviously a gratification that we get from sensory experience. But there are also some drawbacks as well. And it's our lack of recognizing the drawbacks that leads us to suffering, because we are obsessed by the gratification, but we forget about the drawbacks. So when the Buddha talked about sensory pleasures, he talked about three things. He talked about the gratification that we experience, the drawbacks that we experience, and the escape from those experiences. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about the drawbacks. Do you know what the drawbacks are? Have you ever thought about the drawbacks of sensory pleasures? You might have experienced something.
Well, diminishing, I think, almost economic terms, like diminishing marginal returns, right? Like your first ice cream tastes great, then you have another one the next day, it's still good.
Yeah.
Then another day, and then you sort of get tired of it.
Yeah. And that new shiny phone, it's the same thing, isn't it? Kind of like what happens before you get to that ice cream or that phone is this desire, this craving, yeah? So you're thinking about it. And what are the thoughts going through your head? Like,
I must have it.
I've got to get that ice cream. Yeah, my life is going to be so good when I have that ice cream. My life is going to be so good with that new phone. I'll be happy when I have a new phone.
I won't be happy unless I get a new phone.
Yeah. And so you see what starts to happen. The mind is already on this train to, I guess, a deluded view. Because this experience happens time and time again, many times a day, many thousands, billions of times perhaps during our life, that we think we're going to be made happy by sensual pleasures. And I guess this is what it means to get old and hopefully develop some wisdom.
You looking at me?
No, don't look at me. I'm not looking at anyone. You're all young and beautiful, and I'm sure you're all very wise. But I remember seeing people who were maybe in their 80s or so, who looked like they stopped shopping like 30 years ago, you know? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
Those, and they're stuck in time. But hopefully this is because they worked out some wisdom. They're not going to just they've lived a long time, yeah? They're not going to be swung about by the latest fashion. They've seen through it. Imagine you've seen so many things come and go, right? You're not going to be so easily seduced. And I think there's some wisdom there in that hopefully by the end of our life, I think it was Shakespeare, he said in King Lear, there's the fool and there's the king. And the fool said to the king, if you were my fool, I would punish you. And the king said, why? And he said, because you got old before you got wise. So hopefully we can develop some wisdom around these things. And that's why it's so good to know that in the path that the Buddha outlined, that wisdom aspect of the path, that wisdom factor, is this right intention of renunciation. Because renunciation is willingly giving up, making a decision to withdraw from sense desire. And I'm not saying you all have to become monks or nuns, but it's something that we can experience even just as you did before when you come to sit down to meditate. You had to give something up to be here. you had to say to yourself, I'm going to go and meditate with my friends. I'm not going to go out for a fancy dinner. I'm not going to go to the opera. I'm not going to binge the latest thing on Netflix. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. You have to give up things to be here. And when you give up those sensory things and you've sat down in your chair, you've closed your eyes, doors are closed, there's not much sound coming in, your senses are starting to become of secondary importance to you. Yeah? And then where you're going is into the realm of the mind. You're starting to experience the mind, and you're experiencing it with a body that is becoming less and less stimulated by the senses. And when we keep practicing meditation, when we have some more renunciation by going on a retreat, spending a whole weekend of your time where you could be doing anything, literally anything. In this world, literally anything. And you decide to focus on the mind. So a retreat, great example of renunciation. 3 days, good. 1 week, lovely. Even longer, 10 days, amazing. Have you all been on a 10-day retreat here? No? Yeah? People who have? And you survived. What did you take on your 10-day retreat?
Stillness.
Oh, she took stillness. Did you take any luggage?
Took some clothes.
Took some clothes? Did you, please don't feel like you have to answer if you feel uncomfortable. Did you use everything that you took?
Probably not.
Probably not. And I've seen people go off to retreats, even weekend retreats with two suitcases, and you think, what do you have in there? What are you thinking is going to happen on this retreat? And I'm remembering a story from Ajahn Lee Dharmadharo, who was a Thai forest monk, and quite a character actually, and he died many years ago now, but he was once leading a retreat and they had to catch the train to the destination. And so everyone turns up and they're kind of like the Bangkok elite. You know, they've got all of these cases and bags and stuff. And he took one look at them, said, right, we're walking. And people were like, what? You know, they used to be driven around and whatever. And so there they are traipsing down the road with their cases. And, you know, they reach a certain point where they have to stop and unload. And they're tossing things out of the cases, you know. They're working out as they go what's important, you know. And, you know, after people kind of had got rid of a sufficient amount of stuff, that's when he said, right, okay, we'll catch the train. But the important thing is that just going on a retreat doesn't guarantee renunciation. I've been to some retreats where the food is better than the food I'd ever eaten outside of the retreat. You think, what kind of renunciation are you practicing here? Or the accommodation. Sometimes I go to retreat centres now because my accommodation is very basic, just a bed and not much else. So sometimes I go to a retreat and you get like a big fancy bed and an ensuite, pillows, and I'm kind of like, wow. So just going on a retreat doesn't necessarily guarantee any renunciation. But it's still good because you're practicing in this way, you're practicing to overcome, and you notice, all of you have probably noticed when you're being on retreat, that you can suddenly find that you do with less, and it's okay. So there's the fear of needing something that leads us to pack a huge bag full of stuff, and I saw this today on the train, people carrying big backpacks and big stuff, bags like this and 2 or 3 bags. And you think, where have you been? Like, what have you been doing? And so there's the fear of needing something, wanting something, not having the familiar, not having the things that we think we need to survive. And so there's that fear, which is also mixed in with sensory desire. And so these are, in a way, 2 opposing forces that somehow combine. So we have the fear, the anxiety, the ill will of not being comfortable, of having an uncomfortable experience, of having a moment where we are not happy, not peaceful, where we want something, which is the desire. So it's this aversion and attraction which ping-pongs us all throughout our life. We are moved by discomfort to seek comfort. Having got comfort, we find we want more comfort. And so this is how it works for us. We have this insatiable desire towards things based on sensory desire, based on discomfort, based on aversion, based on something that's painful to us. But what happens when you kind of decide to just not get involved with either of those things? Just to have that acceptance, just to have that peace. What happens? Well, you've all experienced it in your meditation practice. You've had the taste of this, yeah? You sit and you watch the mind and you see, there it goes again, looking out for something interesting, hearing a noise, seeing a flash of movement, opening your eyes, wanting a little bit of brownie. There it goes again. The mind goes out to those things. You're sitting there trying to be peaceful, trying to get this contentment you've heard about, and there the mind is leading you away. What is leading you away? Sense desire. Or you're sitting there and you're feeling a bit uncomfortable and you've got some aversion come up. I'm not liking this. This chair is rather purgatorial. I'm sitting, but I'm in pain. My leg is hurting. I'm worried that if I keep on sitting here, I'm going to get an injury. I don't like this room. I hate these people. I just want to get away. Then I'll be happy. And so you see how in our mind, this is what's going on all the time. And then in meditation, when we practice meditation, we start to see what's really going on. And we stop reacting so much to the feelings in the body, the thoughts in the mind, the experiences that we're having. We stop reacting in ways that are just blind, in that we don't consider them, we don't question them, we don't critique what's going on. We just do, because that's what we do in the world. You're walking down the supermarket aisle, and you're like, well, thank you, I'll have that one, and I'll have that one too. And then the next thing you know, you've got a larder full of stuff that you don't even get around to using, that expires before you've even touched the edges of that pantry. And so in our meditation, when we sit and we develop mindfulness and patience, we see what's going on, we understand what's happening, and we're just playing a waiting game. And when we wait long enough, we see that the desires change, the aversion disappears. So we get this experience of change, which is very important to realize, because we realize that was just a blip just a moment in time. And when we didn't get involved in it, we didn't get on that train to complete that thing. When we just sat back and watched, we saw it come up, and that we actually had a choice whether we got involved or not, whether we proliferated in our mind. You know, the idea of chocolate cake comes up, and then suddenly all you can think about is chocolate cake. You're wanting chocolate cake. Oh, I'm going to get that chocolate cake. I hope those other people aren't going to get there first. Take my chocolate cake. And then suddenly you're up and you're running, and you went there. But in meditation, when you realize that this is going on, that pathway gets cut off. And then what happens is, over time, the desire and the aversion starts to atrophy, starts to become less intoxicating. You're less easily seduced. You see it as impermanent, and you see the suffering that's involved, because it's the agitation in your mind that whips you up in your mind into a kind of frenzy of desire. And then you don't have any peace. And so when you keep on meditating, you see that actually that desire, that attachment, that craving, that wanting isn't actually pleasurable. In fact, is a source of suffering in our minds, because we don't have contentment, we don't have a moment's peace. But real contentment, real peace, is the absence of craving, the absence of wanting. And it's not just like something is missing. Like the absence of craving, the absence of desire isn't nothing. It's something. It's a feeling that you can experience. A feeling of being at home in yourself, a feeling of peace, a feeling that this is something which is tangible, able to be known, able to be experienced, and something that can grow. And it starts to grow, and you start to feel more and more peaceful, more and more comfortable, more and more at ease, and you start to enjoy it more, because the mind isn't buffeted by thoughts of wanting something. And you can get this incredibly still, sweet experience in your meditation, where you literally, truly don't want anything at all. You just are so happy to be there. You're so present because your mind isn't being taken away from the present. You're not being thrown into the future or the past. You're present, completely present. And the mind, which is often dispersed and scattered, is unified and cohered in a way that is powerful, because it is not dispersed. And when it's still and steady, the mind is powerful. You can see clearly. You can see penetratively. And this is where we start to develop some samadhi, some stillness of the mind, deep stillness, where there is no movement. And this samadhi deepens and deepens and deepens. And the contentment grows and grows and grows. And that's when wisdom starts to happen. And then after your meditation, you kind of get up and you look around, and it doesn't matter what's going on around you. You just feel so good. You feel so satisfied, Satisfied. You haven't had anything. You've been sitting there. You don't want anything. You're just basking in this good feeling of contentment. This feeling that has come not from sensory objects, sensory experience, not from getting anything, but actually from letting go, of not having, of consciously deciding that you don't in that moment want anything, need anything, have to do anything. And so this is how contentment can come into the mind through meditation. So you experience it in meditation. Then the trick, of course, is to try to apply it to the rest of your life. Because it's very easy to have a nice meditation experience. But then you get home and you think, oh, okay, well, I need this thing, I need that thing, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And all of this stuff makes it more difficult when it comes to sit for your next meditation session, doesn't it? Because you think you've kind of been training your mind in the opposite direction all those waking hours, or your whole week. Then you come to sit for an hour and you think, I can practice contentment. It's going to be hard because you've been conditioning yourself. So one teacher of mine, Ajahn Brahm, he'll often say, there's freedom of desire, which is what we all like to enjoy in the world, this idea that we can have anything we want. I went to the supermarket once, not so long ago, it's been a long time, but there was a whole aisle just of dips. And I was blown away. I had no idea it had become such a big thing. I remember growing up, you had choice of hummus or tzatziki. And now there's a whole aisle, anything you want. So there's this idea that we have this freedom of desire. We can have anything we want. There's something encouraged in our society. So this is one way we can experience freedom and desire. The other is freedom from desire. Not wanting anything, not needing anything. So for that, the world kind of needs us to develop contentment, because the world has finite resources. Our environment has been damaged not by people who are being content, but by people like us who want more all the time, who want to get a new furniture setting, want to take a cruise, want to knock down the house and rebuild another one, want to do this, want to do that. We, as craving beings, as uncontents, discontents, uncontents, I don't know. Malcontents. That sounds even more harsh, like I'm a real kind of fire and brimstone monastic. You malcontents. We malcontents. I still consume. I still need stuff. I still want stuff. We have caused incredible problems for our environment. It's because of desire that kings in the time of the Buddha would invade other countries because they had something that you wanted. And this is an image that the Buddha used. Once he was chatting with a king one day and he said, okay, imagine someone told you that there was a great kingdom over there. What would you do? He said, well, I'll probably get that one too. We're all like this, yeah? Whatever it is that rings our bell, we want more of it. We've all probably got a collection of something, and we weren't satisfied with one or two things. We needed more and more and more and more. And this is the nature of desire. And so to understand our role in in the way things happen in the world, we have to examine our own actions and understand that, we're part of the problem. And it's really hard because we think of ourselves as really good people, we're spiritual people, and yet there's a part of the stuff that we do in life that it can be really problematic. And we should interrogate that a little bit. And I don't want to sound too judgy, but it's the kind of thing like my father once complaining about all the tourists on his holiday. And it's like, can you not see what's going on here? And it's the same as spiritual people. We complain about the state of the world and how the world is full of greed and injustice and how terrible it is that the environment is suffering so much. And then we delude ourselves that by putting a few things into the recycling, that we've solved the problem. No. But anyway, so I don't want to get too carried away with that. But to finish up, I just wanted to mention one of the suttas that talks about sensory desire and the drawbacks. I mentioned that before, the idea that there's the gratification and then there's the drawbacks. And then there's the escape. So you need to understand the drawbacks in order to kind of start thinking about the escape. Otherwise, you're just thinking about the gratification. And the gratification is something that we see. The drawbacks are something that remain invisible, even though actually we know that it's there. We do know that these drawbacks are there. So the first image in this sutta, which is called the Patalaya Sutta, Patalaya is the name of an ascetic who the Buddha was having a conversation with. And so it's in the Majjhima Nikaya number 54. And so the Buddha gives these lists of similes to talk about the drawbacks of sensory pleasures. And so the first one is the image of a dog eating a bone that has been well scraped clean of meat. So it's just the bone. There's only the tiniest little bit of meat on that bone, just the flavour, the smell. Not any substance. But the dog will chew that bone because they're getting a little bit of a hit, yeah? They're getting a little bit of a hit of the smell and the taste, but actually they're never going to get truly satisfied because that bone cannot provide freedom from hunger. That bone will just cause that dog to be depressed and weary, trying to get something out of that bone. And so this is what it's like for us. We think that we're going to be satisfied by these pleasures in life. This is why we keep scrolling. The next scroll, there'll be something interesting there. The next one. This is why we get more pairs of shoes. We want more and more. We think we'll be satisfied, but actually we're not. There's still this hunger for more. So this is the first image the Buddha used. Pretty easy to relate to, isn't it? Like, we've all probably got something that we can acknowledge we thought would make us really happy, but actually we just need more all the time. This is something you can see with things like addiction as well. That, we're all kind of probably high-functioning addicts in some way, And so, but we're never truly made satisfied by it, and that's the problem. We think we will be. In that moment, we truly believe that we will be made satisfied, but we're not. And as we go along in life, hopefully we can start to distinguish between things that are truly satisfying and things that are just ersatz. So the second image is the image of birds fighting over a scrap of meat. And this is something, it's hard to admit, but this is something that is in all of us. We are competitive creatures. You just scratch the surface and you'll see the incivility and the animal nature that takes over. COVID pandemic last year, people fighting over toilet
I
paper.
wanted to say that if that I was
I've seen the Boxing Day sales on television
all mad.
where people push other people out of the way and fight. You went mad. And what was it? It was for these things that we thought, we needed. Toilet paper was one, like, no one could have predicted it, right? Weird. And you just think, yes, all those bottoms. I mean, that's the level of sensory pleasures that we can't do without. You think, how did humans live on this earth for so long without toilet paper? Is it possible that we would survive a day or 2 days? Who knows? So this is the thing, though. This competition leads to things like fighting and violence and people hurting each other. And it's for competition that countries invade other places so they have an advantage. So this fighting is something that can happen. So these birds fighting over this tiny scrap of meat. Third image. Did you want to say something?
Sorry, really quickly, because when you talk about clear thinking, well, I'm not sure how you alluded to the inability to see things.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I had the strangest experience in a supermarket. Absolutely everything leading up to there in my mind was about how insane everybody was about the toilet paper. Was complete madness, bigger than that. And I'm in the supermarket and I noticed that it's quite low, but I'm going to be a normal person and take my one lot of rolls. And I'm at the till and I see there's a family and they've got 2 children in a trolley and it's laden and everything. But in that moment, I almost lost my mind. I just had the sense of having to do what they were doing. And somebody walked past me. I must have seen I must have been standing there with a very strange expression on my face, because he said to me, yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And I just almost sort of needed to hear that to sort of come back to where I was and be able to leave without it. But I just remember thinking that I'd gone from this absolute disdain for this behaviour to being this close to joining in because of what was happening around
And it was just as easy to cut back on curries.
Yes. And I think that it's so important that we're able to recognise that, because it's very easy to judge others. And I realise that, when I'm talking about things like renunciation or sensual pleasures, please don't think that I'm judging you. I'm part of this as well. I haven't overcome these things. But I think what we can start to do is to realise the effect they have on the mind. Because it's all well and good, as I said before, to be content when you have everything you need. But, think about the pandemic or the end of the world. Where will your spiritual self be then? If there's a run on toilet paper now, imagine what it's going to be like if there's a real disaster, or if something happens. Like my friend used to say, who knows what goes on if the lights go off in Harrods? This idea that if there's no one watching, and we see images all the time of looting and violence, and we think, that would never happen. But this is what it means to be, a human animal. This is part of us. And it's when we're tested that we really need to draw upon that spiritual self, that spiritual teaching to guide us. Otherwise, we're just like those birds fighting over that scrap of meat. And so things like my practice of going around with an alms bowl is to encourage people to let go and share. And actually some people find that really hard, And then when they start giving, they actually find it's enjoyable. They care about someone else that's not them. This is the reason Buddhist monastics exist, is to draw out that experience and understanding in others, so that we practice these things on hopefully someone who's a fairly good person, and then when they practice on on a monk giving for alms food or whatever, then they can get into it. Monks and nuns are not your family. They're not your friends. They're not tragic cases on the street who need your pity. We are people who rely upon kindness. And so this is something that we encourage other people to see. Oh, well, that monk, they can't cook, they can't store food, they need to eat, put something in their bowl. We don't ask for anything else. People don't come up to us and put something in our bowl and we say, can I have your car? We practice contentment. We eat whatever's there. We eat whatever is offered, and we're happy with whatever we get. It's quite a different thing to being someone who's going to go home. On the way home, you're thinking, what am I going to have for dinner? Oh, I'm going to cook this. I'm going to need to go to the shops. I'm going to get that, and a few other things while I'm there, and then go home, cook and eat, and then you've got exactly what you wanted, right? So for me, being a monk, I just eat whatever's in my bowl. So that's a practice of renunciation. That's a practice of contentment. How are we going for time?
9:05.
We're supposed to finish up.
Well, yeah, a couple more examples, weren't there?
I'll just give maybe 2 more examples from this sutta. And the third one is the grass torch. So a grass torch is like a bunch of grass, and you've lit it on fire. There you go, it's quite simple. A grass torch. So if you're not careful and you hold that against the wind, it will burn you. You'll get burnt. And so this is something that happens with our pleasures. Yeah? We get burnt. You buy that cheap phone online that you think is a real bargain. It turns out that it doesn't actually exist. You got scammed. You got burnt. You wanted it, but you got burnt. I remember reading about some woman who thought she found a real bargain for a rug. She bought the rug online. Then it came, it was for a doll's house. It wasn't a bargain after all. And, sometimes we like chocolate cake. We eat too much chocolate cake and then we feel sick. We got burnt. We like a little bit of a tipple and then we drink too much and we get hungover. We get burnt by our sensual pleasures. Yeah? So this is what it's like sometimes. There's always this kind of kickback. It's like cause and effect. And so this is just something to be aware of. And the interesting thing actually is just how difficult it is to admit that our pleasures burn us. Just thinking about even just things like dietary illnesses that are endemic, lifestyle illnesses, I think they call them. Lifestyle illnesses. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Preventable, but because we eat too much, drink too much, sit too much, we get really unhealthy. Anyway, so that's another problem. And I'll just skip ahead a few in this list to this idea of borrowed goods. So the image that the Buddha uses in this particular section is that of a person who has borrowed fancy clothes, fancy jewellery, and maybe has a lovely fancy chariot and is kind of riding around town in someone else's finery, thinking, how wonderful I am, how amazing I am, I have everything, people are looking at me. They think I'm rich and famous, but actually it's just borrowed. So our pleasures are like this also. All the things that we're spending our time collecting, all the things that we're spending all our time hoarding and keeping safe, and the houses we build, the jewelry we collect, the photos, everything that we kind of collect, we think it's ours. We think that this is us. We think that this is what it means to be me. All of these things we think represent this self. But actually, It's all just borrowed. And you can't use it to define yourself. These things are not you. This body is not you. It's borrowed. All of this stuff is borrowed. But we grasp onto it and we hold it tight, thinking that this is permanent, stable, a source of pleasure. And then you see people, as I do, often at the end of their life, worried about these things and what's going to happen to it. I'm like, you're dying. Why are you worried about who's getting the china? Why are you thinking about what's going to happen to your camellias? These things, you're stuck in them. You can't let go. This is after a life full of believing that these things bring you happiness and pleasure. But at the end of your life, you'll have to let them go. Even before then, people will take away your pleasures, they'll steal your possessions. Governments will take their taxes. Old age will destroy many of our happinesses. Sickness will destroy many of our pleasures. And this is a truth. So if we keep on putting stock on these borrowed things, then we're going to suffer. Even pyramids, ancient Egypt, or tombs where dying rulers gathered their chattels and their slaves and entombed them all in the pyramids, even that didn't help in the end. Looters came, archaeologists came. Nothing belongs to you in the end, not even this body. And so this idea of borrowed goods was another drawback that the Buddha saw. And so, just to wrap up, the importance of identifying where we can actually experience real happiness. And it's not from grasping, reaching out, holding on. It's from letting go, not wanting, being free from desires, being free from attachment. It's in practicing kindness and generosity, giving your stuff away. You know, sometimes with groups I'll ask them to take something out of their bag and give it to someone. And you see then just how much we hold on, yeah? What have you got in your life now that you could give away to someone else? Someone who might need it more? Probably something. And then comes the moment of doing it, maybe if you don't understand that it's a real blessing to give, you'll still have that attachment there. So generosity is a way that we can actually start to learn how to let go, because we're voluntarily relinquishing something that is a sensory pleasure for us. We could do something else with that money. We have that object in our house. We can look at it all the time, but if we give it away, then we don't have it and we think we're going to suffer. But actually, the giving is a joy, and being generous is a blessing. And we get that joy from giving. We don't get... And this kind of joy is quite beautiful and sustaining, whereas the kind of joy that we have from sensory pleasures is short, temporary, and reliant upon that thing. Whereas true happiness, I think, really comes from letting go and from not needing, not wanting, not desiring, not attaching, not grasping. All of these knots, these are things that we can let go of. And then, if we allow that experience to happen, then we can identify the feeling of contentment. And once we identify that feeling in our meditation or in our life, we can start to grow it. And so over time we become more and more content, more and more happy, more and more peaceful. And the things that happen around us, the objects we have, the things that happen to our body, doesn't affect us so much. And so we can live well and be happy. So this is a short talk on contentment. I hope it's of some benefit to you all.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry we've gone over time.
Oh, nobody was running out the door, so, you know.
They had to
taken.
look content.
Yes, they were content to stay. Thank you very much.